introduced in this year's legislative session would have made the state accountable for HERF sweeps, but it didn't get far. To discuss what happened and what can be done going forward, that bill's sponsor, State Representative Vic Williams, joins me. He's a Republican from Tucson and chair of the House Transportation Committee. Welcome.
Michael, thank you very much for having me here. And unfortunately, HB 2271, which we dubbed Arizona State Highway IOU bill, was not able to get a full hearing in the House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House did allow an informational hearing. It was widely attended. We had about 150 people in the room to discuss the impacts on HERF and, or say, the lack of HERF funding in the state of Arizona and how the legislature has been sweeping this consistently for the last 12 years.
So the accountability factor there was what was important to you in this regard, is that correct?
Well, the philosophical undertone was more than just the HERF sweeps for highway funding. It was about accountability at the governmental level, be it Democrat or Republican, where you're seeing both political parties, when they have control of the legislative process, they will sweep from one pot of money into some other type of agency. And that's a lack of fiscal accountability, it's a lack of fiscal discipline. In my opinion, that is what drives these negative numbers that you see on all legislative bodies here in the state of Arizona, throughout the United States and the other states around the union, as well as federal government.
So we get accountability, we know how much has been swept for whatever purposes away from transportation funding. What's next? What's the reality about whether any of that gets paid back or what happens there?
Well, once again, this bill, what it was to do was to, one, chronicle the amount of sweeps, which are now at a range of about $1.4 billion over the last 12 years from our state highway fund. So if you've run over a pothole recently, that might be one of the contributing factors. To, one, have a ledger of those dollars, and then also determine or also dictate if there are any future sweeps that would go onto this ledger and need to be repaid to the state general fund at some point in time, or pardon me, back to the HERF fund at some future date when there are excess funds in the legislature.
Now, one thing that we've been hearing in reporting this story this week is that a gasoline tax-based fund is kind of outmoded or obsolete based on what's going on with fuel efficiencies and alternative fuels. What do you say about that?
Well, yeah, I would say, but let me extrapolate and build upon that comment. Currently, in the state of Arizona, we collect 18 cents per gallon. And we know that there's been basically a constant source of revenue for about $1.2 billion per year. However, with the efficiencies in automobiles that we're now seeing, we're not getting an increase in revenue coming into the state. And at some point in time, we're going to have to find other ways of funding our highway system. But first, before we look at other measures of funding, we have to stop the bleeding. We have to stop both Democrats and Republicans alike going into the state highway fund and using it as their slush fund to balance whatever programs that they want to push. Once we do that, I think what the measure needs to be coming into the future is, one, it's about miles traveled on our state highway system, and two, the weight of the vehicle. Some combination and formulaic condition based on that should dictate how much people are paying into the system.
So what's the impact if nothing changes with that? Because that's quite a bit of reform to change the way the system would work, even based on what your bill would have done.
Right, and once again, look, we have to take minor steps, baby steps moving forward to ultimately correct this. We have to stop the legislature from sweeping these funds. Now, I hope that the voters of Arizona will take some action in controlling the legislature in the future from doing these funds. Obviously, the appetite for the people who control the legislature now and those who controlled the legislature a few years back are unwilling to take substantial reform and find fiscal accountability for the voters of Arizona.
Do you think it'll get to the point where local governments will just have to take on transportation funding in a more complete way for themselves and not be so reliant on state money?
You know, that's hard to give a blanket statement. You look at the 91 different towns and cities in the state of Arizona, the 15 different counties. I'm fortunate enough to represent Oro Valley and Marana. Both of them have been able to fund and maintain their highways appropriately, one by receiving the HERF dollars, two by having some of their general funds. But you take a look at what's going on in the city of Tucson, an absolute failure in able to keep their surface streets paved and maintained in a reasonable measure. So it's difficult to say how that's going to work at each municipality because they all have their own unique circumstances and say their own political agendas and priorities. But I can say this, that transportation needs to become a greater priority for local governments in southern Arizona. We're getting to a point of a critical stage where we're no longer going to be able to maintain or maintenance some of these roads that are deteriorating, or we're going to get to a state where they're going to need to be completely refurbished or say torn up and redone, and that's going to be an economic disaster for the region. And as well, if we don't do this, and it's already starting at some level, it's starting to strangle out our economy. It's about economy, it's about quality of life, and these are issues that I hope that we can start focusing on at a regional level with more intensity than has been given in the past.
We have just about a half a minute remaining, and in that time, would you tell me if you think that transportation should pay for itself? In other words, should the gasoline tax or whatever other tax on use of the roads, should that pay for itself, or should there be general fund subsidies, if you will?
Well, at the local level, yes. At towns and cities, they may need some type of subsidy, or once again, that's the flavor of the local municipality. At a state level, we need to find additional revenue sources, but first we have to protect the existing money so we can move forward from there.
Representative Vic Williams, Republican from Tucson, Chair of the House Transportation Committee. Thanks so much for speaking with me.
Michael, thank you for having me. My pleasure.